What's up, everybody? We get so many questions about conspiracy theories on cases that we're following on this channel, about what ifs. And someone said, Pete Sardis and I have known each other for over 20 years, and we usually see eye to eye, but there are some things we see very differently. I'm going to follow the case. Pete's going to bring in the theories. What is mainstream media saying? What are the reports saying? Is it real? Is it fake? Did it come in at trial? And we're going to discuss it because, as we've seen in trials, one side or the other can do something that makes previously inadmissible evidence come in by opening the door. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you listen to our podcast. Let me know what you think in the comments. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Opening the Door podcast. We talk about stuff that happens outside the courtroom on cases that occur inside the courtroom. And on this case, in this episode, we're talking about restitution, commissary, funds made by a criminal defendant while in prison, and funds coming from outside the prison walls and how all of that works together. We're going to talk about what happens when crime pays, as Pete Sardis likes to say, if they're going to sell their story to a book or a movie or a TV deal. Who gets that money? Is it right that a criminal defendant could potentially profit off of heinous acts for which they are committed? So, Pete, welcome in. Thanks for joining us, as always, here on the podcast.
Happy to do it.
And we are doing this primarily for the podcast in audio form, but we are going to put up a document just to look at, and we will read through it to give some examples of what exactly a prisoner can buy from the commissary. Okay, we're going to talk about how it works in federal prisons. We're going to talk about how it works in state prisons because there are different rules in all these different places. So for this discussion, what really prompted this discussion was Darrell Brooks. The Darrell Brooks case, he was convicted. And there were hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. It was a high-profile case that caught the internet by storm. Everybody was watching, all eyes on him. It was a wild ride throughout the trial. And so people became worried. And it was mentioned multiple times in his restitution hearing that the state believes he's going to sell his story for a movie, a book, or a TV deal of some sort. So when that starts to happen, Pete, let's start talking about how all of this works in the criminal process post-conviction.
Yeah, and let's just say that, let's start with the premise that every state has its own system. The federal government is different than each and every state, but the basic gist is this. The vast majority of states have some type of law that precludes people that are involved in a murder, for example, from profiting from their crimes. We call it the Son of Sam laws. That's just kind of like the anecdotal way of calling it, just to give it a name. But you know what? I'll tell you, they've been all over the place. And Wisconsin, because you did it on the Brooks case, Wisconsin used to be a state where you could take a heck of a lot more from a criminal defendant. And then recently, and I'll tell you, back in 2022, there was a case where some inmate basically was arguing about how little of his prison work money he was getting. So they changed the statute back to what it was like 30 years ago, 25%. So it really is, it's state by state. Everybody's a little bit different, but the vast majority of states have some preclusion to people profiting from the crimes they've committed.
So there are a lot of different ways to look at this. And I think the first thing in the first place we should start at is how prisoners can make money. So there's two main ways.
Yeah.
You can either make it by working, and you can make it by selling your story, basically. Can you explain how that process actually works for someone that's in prison?
All right. If you actually work inside of a prison, you're actually compensated for that work that you do. And the truth of the matter is, understanding in prison, it's either sit in your cell and stare at the ceiling, or have something to do. So really, work inside of the prison is something very coveted. People want to have something to do. Now, the pay scale is not what you're thinking. On average in the country, it's somewhere between 10 cents and 65 cents per hour, depending on the program you're in, depending on the prison that you're in. So based on those wages, those hourly wages of basically cents, that money goes into your commissary account. And with that money, you can buy stuff like that's on that list, or many times restitution payments and payments that you might owe, money that you might owe, child support, for example, comes out of a portion of that money. There's another way to get money. Go ahead.
Before we get to what that money gets spent on, let's focus on just how the money comes in. So you get a job. You can get a job cleaning the facilities. You can get a job hole punching, stapling, organizing books, organizing the mail, right? Whatever stuff that has to get done in the prison facility.
Making license plates.
Shawshank Redemption.
Right.
Doing the taxes. That's not actually what happens, but there are things like that prisoners can do that you see working in the road and things like that. You see prisoners out there working, they get paid for that. Right.
And there's also another way is your friends and family members can put money in your account, and they basically take their money and basically throw it on a credit card, and it goes into your prison account for your use. Those are the two ways you make money in prison. There's no other way.
Well, yeah. Or you could sell your story, right?
Well, yeah, of course. At which point, if your own, efforts derive profits, then obviously you can profit from that.
Right. And, people all think about, the gang members or whatever, that they have somebody doing work for them, giving them money. That's more friends and family giving you money.
Right.
But literally you can have HBO, Netflix, whoever can write you a check and put it in your commissary for your story, for an interview. You can get paid to help people write books, make movies, make TV shows, docuseries, things like that. Now, when we focus on that way and that form of payment, okay, how does it work and we can talk about jurisdictionally speaking, right? We've got federal. We're going to kind of focus on 3 just because we can't talk about all 50 states. We're going to focus on Florida, which is where we are, federal court, which is the nation, and then Wisconsin, which is where Darrell Brooks is. What are some of the differences in how that money can come to you as a defendant when you sell your story, if at all, when you have restitution payments to the victims in your cases, and when you have court costs and fines that you have to pay back to the state?
All right. Let's start with the most restrictive and kind of work our way down. Florida is the most restrictive, and Florida's law is very simple. You cannot profit from any crime. So whether it's a murder that was highly publicized, or whether it's, a shoplifting offense where you got convicted on a misdemeanor and got probation, you cannot profit from that criminal event at all. So if at some point I were to go sell my story for, a shoplifting case and HBO buys it for $100 million, the state has the right to come back and take that money and put it into basically trust. And that trust is used for, if there is any restitution, if there's any costs owed, things like that. You cannot take any of it. The rest goes in the victim's compensation fund.
Right. And that's the victim compensation fund is something that's woefully underfunded because things like Darrell Brooks happen. And if there is no insurance, those victims can't get paid. There was a lot of GoFundMes and things that happened because of the high profile nature of that case specifically. But there are so many lower profile cases that happen where people have serious damages. They can't collect from it. And that's where the money would go for that. And it can be as simple as these days, somebody filming themselves committing a crime in Florida and posting it on YouTube, and that video getting monetized, making money, whatever is 10 million views, it goes viral and they make $100,000 off of it. That still counts. You cannot take that money because you are profiting off of your crime, and that will be taken by the government and basically applied where it is needed.
Right.
Okay. So that's how Florida works.
Right. The second least restricted is the federal system. And right now there's actually discussions going on to change the rules. And the rule will be, I think they're going to pass this law, is that the feds have the right to take 75% of whatever's in your commissary account. So if you profit from something that is not covered
HBO pays you $1 million.
Please let me just clarify some things. In federal courts, you've also got probation, contracts, and there are terms of release and all these things that kind of go hand in hand with your judgment and sentence. So normally, if anybody thinks that you're going to profit, they put it into your judgment and sentence that any monies that you may make from this go back to paying restitution, court costs, fees, all of that stuff first. But what's happening now is the feds want to tighten it up and to actually include the money in your commissary account. So the money that you get from your 65 cents an hour that you make inside the prison for work, or the money that mom and dad put in your commissary account so they can call you on the weekends. The feds want to take 75% of whatever that is in order to pay for restitution and things of that nature. Because in the federal system, there's a lot of high profile folks that have a heck of a lot of money, thousands of dollars in their commissary account that still have huge amounts of money due for restitution and for fines and costs, R. Kelly being one of those people. And they're trying to find a way to get that loophole closed. So as opposed to what it is now, 25%, they want to bump it up to 75%.
And R. Kelly's another case that we covered here, got convicted federally, obviously. There are damages, restitution, court costs, fines, all sorts of things associated with that. Now, I think it is important, especially when we're talking about R. Kelly and people like you're talking about that have money, to differentiate. He is still allowed to, regardless, whether it's Florida or anywhere else, he is still allowed to collect royalties, money off selling his music and things like that. Is not profiting off of your crime.
Correct.
We are talking specifically if he was going to sell the story of the crazy rules in his house and make a movie based off of what he was convicted of, that ring and that RICO crime, that would be profiting specifically off that. So there is a major difference on how you get your money into your commissary as to whether or not the Son of Sam law will apply in some variation in your state.
The feds want to change it, that it doesn't matter. That if you have restitution or if you have monies that you owe, you should have to pay that money before you get to buy candy or ramen noodles or shoes or anything else that you might want in the commissary. And that's kind of the thought process of the feds. Whether or not that money is from,
legitimate proceeds or selling your right. But what's important though is I'm talking about how it applies to the Son of Sam law.
Clearly.
So in Florida, like they can't touch R. Kelly's money if he was in a Florida state penitentiary, right? So I just want to make that clear, that difference.
Your legitimate earnings are not part of this discussion.
Additionally, state and federal governments can garnish your wages and things like, so they can then go above and beyond and it not just be profiting off of this crime, but they can go get money you're legitimately making and take that for restitution for court costs and fines. But I think what's interesting is there could be a loophole for someone like R. Kelly where he's got legitimate funds and they're not as easily collectible as if he puts $10,000 in his commissary, right? That's what you're saying. They'll just be able to be like, take $7,500 of that right now.
Right. Because R. Kelly, frankly, I'll bet you the vast majority of his legitimate assets are in some LLC, some corporation that is managed by some, record label, at which point they come in and just put money in his commissary account so he can buy whatever he wants to buy. And the feds see that as a loophole that they want to close, at which point they're going to say, look, if you've still got money that you owe legitimately, for all of whatever happened in your case, you should not be able to have, the finer things in prison, if that's the right way to say it, until that all gets satisfied. I think that's really a matter of they feel slighted.
So it basically becomes a tax. Anything
really
you want to buy that costs $1, you're going to have to pay $1 plus 75%. To the government first or to the victims first. So while we're here and before we get to Wisconsin and how they look at it, let's remember to get to Wisconsin and still apply this to Darrell Brooks. But I think now's a good time to talk, what can they actually get from the commissary? And for anybody watching on YouTube, I know it comes out later on YouTube, but we're going to talk about for a second and show on YouTube, but I'm going to read it here for you so that everybody can kind of be on the same page as far as, whoops, that was a little too zoomed in, as to what you can buy in your commissary and just kind of look through some of this. You can get books, you can get bottled water, you can get a French vanilla cappuccino, you can get other kinds of coffee, you can get tuna and salmon and Spam and beef bites. You can get health products like aspirin, like Band-Aids, like Bengay, dental products. You can get certain kinds of toothpaste and floss. You can get snacks like rice cakes or cosmetics like a blush brush, a cosmetic bag, an eyebrow pencil. You can get candy like a Hershey's bar. You can get condiments like garlic powder and honey and jalapeno peppers and things like that. Hygiene products like Dial soap, laundry items, Tide Pods, clothing like gloves and baseball caps and additional extra items, right? They still get fed in prison even if you have no money in your commissary, right? These things are above and beyond.
Yeah, the basics are always taken care of by the state. So you're always going to have food, water, shelter. You're going to be clean. You get government soap. You get government flip-flops. You get your government sweatshirt. But if you want anything beyond that to make your life a little bit more comfortable, you have to go through the commissary. That's the only way to get things. Contrary to popular belief, I mean, you kind of see some of these old movies like, wise guy movies where, the wife is, smuggling in, Parmesan cheese and, and Italian bread. That stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a perfect example. You can have the regular shampoo, or you can upgrade, as we're putting on the screen now, Suave shampoo or some kind of upgraded shampoo. You can get air fresheners. You can get a microwavable bowl. You can get a bowl with a lid on it. And all this stuff, I mean, as sad as it is, but that's part of the punishment, right? This stuff is a big deal in prison. If you can get this stuff, you can get a microwavable bowl. If you can get, an eyebrow pencil, it can change the way you feel about yourself for a while. And it really goes, talking to some of our clients who have ended up in prison, it goes a long way with your psyche. And not everybody is a murderer that's in prison. Not everybody is there for the rest of their life. So some kind of normalcy or some kind of something to keep them going, to help them pay for their crimes, is important and can make a really big deal. So it's not a joke. Some of these things are really important to them, and you see how much it costs, right? You see how an aspirin, $1.60, baby powder, $1.55, Speed Stick deodorant, $2.55, shampoo, $1.65, Head and Shoulders, $6.40. If you're making 10 cents an hour, that's a lot of hours you have to work to pay for that shampoo. And then if the government, this is a federal commissary list, if the government is taking 75% of that, I mean, you're working for weeks and weeks to afford one bottle of shampoo or a comb, things like that.
There are people on both sides of this debate. And one of the sides on the don't take their commissary money debate is what you said. It gives the people something to look forward to. It keeps people from feeling helpless, because helplessness and hopelessness in prison are not good, especially for prison guards, because that's when people start doing stupid things like attacking guards or trying to throw themselves off of railings because they just feel completely empty. And this is a kind of a way to give you something to kind of lessen the experience of prison, to give you some normalcy, like you say, in your prison life.
Yeah. And here's what I'll say. And people might disagree with me when I say this, but I think there's a very big difference when we're talking about crimes that have victims that are owed restitution. I am 100% fine with taking 100% of their commissary money. If you did something to damage somebody else and probably benefit yourself, you can pay all those people back before you get an extra toothbrush or some better toothpaste. That's how I feel. Victimless crimes, or, I mean, I know it's hard to find a real victimless crime because even when the government is the victim, it affects everybody and taxpayer dollars and things like that. So I agree with that. But I think certain crimes, maybe you shouldn't touch their commissary, but other ones, I have no problem, especially when we transition to somebody like Darrell Brooks. I wouldn't care if they took every penny of his commissary money to pay restitution back, to pay the taxpayers back, right? Because one of the things that the defense argued is to add this restitution, or add this, restitution money was a form of punishment and was not a form of rehabilitation. And I know you have some notes in there as to what that looks like and why some of these, I call them damages, but they're not real damages in criminal court, it's restitution, why they're just symbolic. So explain that for a little bit, as why they're more symbolic than they are a real thing for somebody like Darrell Brooks.
Yeah, let's talk about Darrell Brooks. His restitution number, last I checked, is $523,293.01. And that includes monies owed to victims, insurance companies, the court, fees for that they attach to everything for when you plead guilty, all of that stuff. At 10 to 65 cents an hour, if Darrell Brooks worked 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would take him 200 years to be able to pay that restitution number off. So the reality is he'll never have this money. He'll never be in a position where he's going to be able to make people whole because he's been in prison for the rest of his life. So the restitution number is, in my opinion, symbolic. It symbolizes that we care about this. We have made this defendant and this prisoner obligated for this number, but we all recognize it's most likely, and I say that now, most likely never going to get paid. In today's world of social media, and today's world of, that you can make money basically by going viral for something heinous, that may be a different discussion. But in the old days, you're in prison for the rest of your life. Shawshank Redemption, that guy's never paying his restitution because he doesn't have any means upon which to do.
Which kind of brings us to the only reason or way that they're not symbolic, which the state did argue in the Darrell Brooks case, is if he gets some kind of movie deal or book deal. 500 grand or whatever he owes is not really that much when you think about how much you think Netflix made off the Murdaugh mystery or murders or whatever they call it. Millions. Literally, they would have paid millions to get Murdaugh to come there and confess on video. Okay. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Maybe they wouldn't. I don't want to say that people would do things that other people would think is despicable. I think they would have at least considered it in a boardroom where maybe nobody would ever find out about it, because the numbers would be so big. So for him to make that kind of money is not impossible or even implausible in this situation. So why is that ever allowed? What are the rights or the considerations or the public policy arguments in federal court and state court as to why this is even something that anybody would ever allow?
There are certain rights, inalienable rights, that we all have under the Constitution. And I'll give you some basics just to kind of preface the conversation. If you're sitting in prison and you want to write a book, I'm not talking a book about your crime, a book about your thoughts and, kind of the way your life was, an autobiography. You have every right to write that book. You can write the manuscript. You can send that manuscript to your family. You can actually, in some prisons, they actually put you in contact with publishers. And the reason that they do that is because, A, it's your constitutional right. You have the right of free speech. The second reason is
you lose a lot of constitutional rights when you go to prison.
Yeah, you do lose a lot of them, but this one has been protected. The First Amendment apparently has been
somewhat protected.
It is somewhat protected. You can't just kind of go off on tangent. But if you want to write something that's totally unrelated to your crime, you want to write your own autobiography, it has nothing to do with the crime that you're incarcerated for, you can write that book. Nobody can stop you from writing that manuscript. In fact, if you look at the Bureau of Prisons, they almost promote this because it helps understand criminal psyche. So they say they learn a lot from when they read what prisoners' life experiences were like, or how they got to where they got to that brought them into this crime that they're convicted of. But the other side of the story is, what are you doing? You committed a crime, you've devastated people's lives. How can you be allowed to profit from that? And that's kind of where the Son of Sam laws came into place when Berkowitz wrote a book. And of course, everybody jumped on it, and a lot of money started flowing. There came a point where it's like, well, what are we doing here? How can it be ethical, moral to allow this person to make money on the horrible, heinous things that he did, and talk about the death of family members, the murders of people? It just doesn't sit right. So there's a balancing act. Most states do not allow people to profit from even the interviews. For example, if somebody wanted to go interview, pick somebody, Darrell Brooks, he can't be paid for the interview. They're not allowed to do that. But again, the lawyers are challenging a lot of these laws, and they have really fluctuated tremendously over the course of the last, let's just say, 20 years.
I would say, let's write a new law that you can profit, you can get paid for interviews, you can get paid for movies and all that stuff up to the restitution amount that you owe your victims. That's the problem.
Yeah, but that's what a lot of states do. I mean, to transition to Wisconsin, if you want to do it now, Wisconsin takes your money at 25%. But if you pay off your restitution, court cost, fees, all that stuff, that's your money.
Right. I think that we should cut it at that point, or limit it at that point, or do something, not allow them to profit off of their case, I should say. If they want to make money a legitimate way, or they want to work in prison, I think that's a great idea. Actually, that helps rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. It helps keep them busy and their minds busy, like you said, not plotting and planning to do other bad things because there's no hope, and they're just hopelessness and helplessness, like you said, can just drive people to do horrible things. And that's not what anybody wants, obviously.
We should probably mention, because I don't know if people are thinking about this. Let's just presume Darrell Brooks does do a book deal. And let's just presume he gets millions and millions of dollars, and he pays off all of his restitution. He pays off all that stuff, right? And then the money technically is his. Well, that doesn't mean that the victims can't sue him and go searching for that money on the civil side. That doesn't preclude them from being able to attach those assets based on litigation. Think about O.J. Simpson. Even though he was not guilty of the crime of murder, the families of his victims, or the alleged victims, I should say, still sued him and won money, from him and collected a lot of it.
Yeah. And I think that is, every case is kind of different, and it's hard. And just our discussion, you see how hard it is. And I hope everybody listening understands how hard it is to write these laws and consider all of these things that are important. Consider victims, consider criminal defendants, consider the judicial system, consider state governments, federal government, tax dollars, taxpayers. it basically affects everyone everywhere.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's kind of the important part is we have to make laws. We have to make rules. We try to make them the best way. We try to make them have the best effect on people that they possibly can. And that's, I think, what's so difficult when we talk about things like this is that we do want to still protect even the limited rights that convicted felons and prisoners have, but to what extent?
Right.
And I think when it comes to victims and it comes to restitution, they should get absolutely nothing extra until those people are made whole.
Right.
And I don't think we should feel bad about that because they do get food, they do get water, they do get a bed to sleep on. They get the basic needs for life, but that's just kind of where I stand. What do you think?
But the way I look at it is there's a balancing act, and we consider and talk about the extremes, the Darrell Brooks of, the R. Kellys, all the extremes. And it's a lot easier to make decisions when you're talking about this level of offender. But you got to understand that that there's a balancing act because there's a whole lot of offenders, actually the substantial majority that don't fall into that category. So whatever law you pass for Darrell Brooks, you pass for the guy that's sitting in a jail cell for a year for not paying his child support. He doesn't get a cup of soup until he pays his child support, sitting in jail at 10 cents an hour. He's going to get out soon, and you're going to want him to not be you're going to want him to be a valuable member of society. You want him to learn his lesson and go forward. You don't want to destroy this person's psyche and make him an even more heinous criminal when he comes out.
Like committing a crime while in prison because he's like, what? I'm never going to get above this. This is just too much over my head. I'm buried. It's over.
You got to understand, there was a time in U.S. prison history where they would actually put everybody in solitary confinement, and they basically said you just have to reflect on your crime for whatever many years. And people literally went insane. And you were just putting insane people out on the street because they'd sat in a box without any communication with any other person for a year or 2 years or 5 years. So, you've got to be careful of the extremes because we've tried the extremes in the past and they don't work. And that's kind of how we learn, which is why, some of the advocates for this commissary system really are very adamant about how important it is for the entire way the prison system works. Forget about the fact that the inmates consider it currency. But the last thing you want is to put guards at risk because you've taken a person to a point where, like you say, you've made them so low that they don't feel like they have anything else to live for. They're not looking at 5 years down the line when I'm released. They're looking at this very moment and they can't get around that. So there is a balancing act. Listen, I'm with you 110%. Darrell Brooks, you need to pay your restitution. You need to pay for what you've done. But at the same time, it cannot be an overarching theory of the entire prison system because it doesn't fit all of the offenders out there.
And the last point to connect it with is Murdoch. And you said something interesting there, that it's currency. We heard that he's betting beef sticks and cigarettes and whatever it is. So you have the commissary, you buy that stuff, but then you can trade it, and you can trade it for all sorts of things. You can trade it for favors, for protection, inside, out, things to do, people to do things for you, for other money. Like, maybe they're out of beef sticks now and you got the last one. Instead of paying $2.50 for it, maybe you're going to get $15, or he'll buy you 5 packs of cigarettes for the one beef stick. So it all does kind of play into the society that is in prison. And it's just kind of a wild thing to think about. And we've had it hit so many cases recently that I thought it'd be an interesting topic for us to break down together today. So I appreciate you coming on, talking about this stuff. Appreciate everybody that's listening. Make sure you hit that like button on YouTube if you're watching. Make sure you subscribe to whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and let us know what you thought of the episode. Put your questions in the comments and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen. Appreciate it. That's all we've got for this episode of Opening the Door. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at Tragos Law is our handle. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast featuring new episodes every week. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.